It was a Wednesday morning when everything changed. The sun was barely peeking through the clouds, casting a muted glow over the high school courtyard as students shuffled between buildings, exchanging hurried words and half-hearted greetings. It was just another day at Riverwood High, where the routine of teenage life felt like an endless loop, until one moment, a single comment, would fracture that routine and set everything on an irreversible course. Jamal Carter sat near the back of Mr. Whitmore's classroom, just as he had done for the past 2 years. His face was calm, his eyes focused on the notebook in front of him, but inside, his mind was racing. He always sat at the back, not because he wanted to avoid attention, but because it was easier to stay invisible. The less people noticed him, the less they could judge him. And today, it felt like he needed that invisibility more than ever. It wasn't the work on the board that had his attention. It was the undercurrent of tension that ran through the room, a growing sense of unease. It was just a few moments ago when Mr. Whitmore, a man who prided himself on being the cool teacher, had made a joke. A joke, like any other. But this one wasn't like the others. "Come on, Jamal," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice booming across the room. "Don't act like you haven't had a bit too much chicken this morning. I bet your mom gave you the whole fried chicken for breakfast, didn't she?" A few scattered laughs echoed across the classroom. Mr. Whitmore chuckled as if he had just cracked the funniest joke ever, but Jamal didn't laugh. His heart clenched, and for a moment, the room seemed to go silent. He felt the eyes of the class on him, waiting for him to respond, for him to laugh along with them. But he couldn't. Not this time. The joke wasn't funny. It never was. Jamal had been subjected to subtle and not so subtle racist comments before, but this one hit differently. It was casual, tossed out without thought, a stereotype wrapped in the form of a joke that seemed harmless enough, unless you were the target. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to push the heat rising in his chest back down. He could feel the burn of humiliation creeping up on him, but he wasn't about to show it. Not today. He forced a smile, the kind that people wear when they're trying to convince the world, and themselves, that they're okay. He wasn't sure if anyone noticed the slight tremble in his hands, but in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was getting through the day. But as the class continued, the joke lingered in the air like a bad odor, impossible to ignore. Jamal didn't laugh, but he could feel the eyes of his classmates, those who thought the joke was funny, those who didn't say anything but didn't speak up either. The silence that followed the joke was deafening. And Jamal, he wasn't sure what bothered him more, the joke itself, or the fact that no one seemed to care that it wasn't funny at all. Later that day, as Jamal walked down the hallway, the weight of what had happened in Mr. Whitmore's class seemed to follow him like a shadow. He could still hear the laughter echoing in his ears, and he could still feel the sting of being reduced to a stereotype in front of his peers. The hallway was crowded, the sound of lockers slamming shut and students chatting creating a constant hum of noise, but to Jamal, it all felt distant. He had always been the quiet one. Not because he didn't have a voice, but because speaking up often led to more problems than solutions. But today, something inside of him was different. There was a tension building inside of him, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had finally reached his breaking point. "Hey, Jamal," came a voice behind him, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see his best friend, Kayla, walking toward him, her eyes filled with concern. Kayla was the one person who had always been there for him, the one person who understood without needing an explanation. She had always had his back, even when the rest of the world seemed determined to tear him down. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but insistent. Jamal nodded, trying to force a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." But Kayla wasn't buying it. She had known Jamal for too long to be fooled by a half-hearted smile. "Don't lie to me," she said softly. "What happened in there?" Jamal hesitated, unsure of how to explain the feeling that had settled in his chest. How could he put into words the hurt, the anger, the humiliation he had felt in that moment? How could he explain that it wasn't just the joke, but the way everyone had laughed and then moved on, as if nothing had happened? Mr. Whitmore made a joke, Jamal said, his voice tight. At my expense. You know, the usual, just another stereotype. Kayla's eyes flashed with anger, but she kept her voice calm. What kind of joke? The usual kind, Jamal replied bitterly. Like I'm some kind of joke. Like I'm not even a person, just a stereotype for everyone to laugh at. Kayla shook her head, her fists clenched at her sides. That's not okay, Jamal. You don't deserve that. I know, Jamal muttered, the words thick in his throat. But what am I supposed to do about it? Kayla didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at him, her gaze searching, as if weighing her words carefully. You speak up, she said finally. You make it known that it's not okay. You can't just let them get away with this. Jamal felt a pang of unease in his chest. He had always been the one to let things slide, to avoid conflict whenever possible. It was easier that way. But Kayla's words lingered in his mind. For the first time, the thought of letting it go didn't seem so easy. He swallowed hard. I don't know if I can, Kayla. You can, she said firmly. I'll be right here with you. You're not alone in this. Jamal's mind raced. Was she right? Should he speak up? Should he stand up for himself, even though he knew it would make things harder? He wasn't sure. But one thing was certain, the way he had felt in that classroom, the humiliation, the anger, it couldn't just disappear. It wasn't just a joke. It was something deeper. Something that had been festering for far too long. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would mark the beginning of something bigger. The beginning of a fight, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever been made to feel less than human because of who they were. Back in the classroom, Mr. Whitmore went on with his lesson, unaware of the storm brewing just outside his door. The students continued to listen, or rather, pretended to listen, but none of them knew what was coming. Not yet. Jamal's thoughts were far from the lesson at hand. As he sat there, staring at his notebook, he realized one thing: this wasn't just about a joke anymore. It was about respect. It was about dignity. And most of all, it was about standing up, no matter the cost. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jamal Carter wasn't the kind of person who wanted attention. He wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't the class clown, nor was he the popular kid. He wasn't even the person you'd expect to stand up in front of a classroom and make a scene. No, Jamal was the quiet one, the type of kid who kept his head down, his ears open, and his mouth shut. But Jamal had a story. A story that many of his classmates didn't know, some of them might have even been too quick to judge him. They saw the calm exterior, the straight A's, and they assumed he had everything figured out. But beneath the surface, there was more. A lot more. He was born to a single mother in the small, quiet town of Riverwood. His mom, Maria, had raised him on her own, juggling 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Jamal never really understood how hard his mom worked until he got older. When he was a kid, it didn't seem like much. She was always around, always there to comfort him when he had a bad day, or to tell him stories about when she was growing up. But he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the lines that grew deeper with each passing year. Jamal knew what it meant to live paycheck to paycheck. He knew the sting of hearing other kids talk about their vacations to Disney World or their new phones, while he had to make do with second-hand clothes from the local thrift store. It was a tough childhood, but Jamal had never complained. His mom was his rock, and he admired her resilience. She taught him to be strong, to push through the hard times, and to never let anyone make him feel like he was less than anyone else. But it wasn't always easy. Jamal's school life was just as complicated. Riverwood High was a microcosm of the town itself, divided by invisible lines of race and class. The white kids, the wealthy ones, always seemed to have it easy. They had everything: new cars, the best clothes, and vacations that made Jamal's heart ache with longing. But it wasn't just the material things that separated them. It was the way they looked at him sometimes, as if he didn't belong. As if he was an outsider in a place where he should have felt at home. Jamal had always been the smart kid, the one who aced all his tests, who did his homework, who participated in class discussions. He knew his teachers respected him for that, even though some of them didn't quite understand him. Mr. Whitmore was one of those teachers. But it wasn't just the teachers. It was the other students too. It was the way they ignored him, as if he wasn't even there, and then, there were the jokes. The comments. The way they'd look at him sometimes, like he was the embodiment of every stereotype they had ever heard. Jamal didn't let it bother him at first. He had learned how to tune it out, how to smile when people made jokes at his expense, and how to pretend like it didn't hurt. He kept his head down, focused on his grades, and waited for graduation. That was his escape. That was his ticket out of this town and into something better. But then came the joke from Mr. Whitmore. That moment. The one that snapped something inside him. The one that made him realize that no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, the world would always see him through a lens of prejudice. And he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending it didn't bother him. At home that night, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. His mom, Maria, was in the living room, watching TV. The soft glow of the television illuminated the small apartment, casting long shadows across the room. The place wasn't much, but it was home. Jamal's mom had always been supportive, but he could see the worry in her eyes when she looked at him these days. She knew something was wrong. She always did. "Jamal," she said softly, her voice cutting through the silence. "You okay, baby?" Jamal didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. He didn't want to burden her with this, with the weight of what was going on in his life right now. She had enough on her plate already. "Jamal?" Maria repeated, walking into the kitchen and sitting across from him. She placed her hand on his, the warmth of her touch offering him a sense of comfort he didn't realize he needed. "You don't have to carry this alone, you know." Jamal lifted his head, looking into her eyes. There was no judgment there, just concern, just love. He had always been able to talk to his mom, but right now, he didn't know where to start. How could he explain how he felt? How could he tell her that a teacher had humiliated him in front of everyone and that he didn't know how to handle it? I don't know, Mom," he said, his voice strained. "Something happened today at school. Mr. Whitmore, he made a joke. A racist joke. About me." Maria's expression hardened, and Jamal could see the muscles in her jaw tense. She had been through so much in her life, but she had never been one to back down when it came to standing up for what was right. "Tell me everything," she said, her tone gentle but firm. Jamal took a deep breath, the words coming out in a rush. He told her everything, about the joke, about the way the class had laughed, about how he had tried to brush it off, but how it still hurt. How it felt like the walls of the school, the walls of the town, had closed in around him. How, for the first time, he didn't feel like he belonged, even in his own skin. Maria listened quietly, her face unreadable. When he finished, she didn't say anything at first. She just sat there, looking at him, as if trying to understand everything he had just said. Finally, she spoke. "You're not alone in this, Jamal. And this isn't your burden to carry. No one should ever make you feel like that. Not even him. Not anyone." Jamal nodded, feeling a knot in his chest loosen. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He wasn't alone. He had her. And maybe, just maybe, that was the strength he needed to do something about it. But he still wasn't sure what that something was. He had always tried to do things the right way, keep his head down, work hard, keep his grades up. But what do you do when the system itself is the problem? What do you do when the people who are supposed to help you are the ones tearing you down? For the first time, Jamal felt the weight of the question pressing down on him. And in that moment, he made a choice. He wouldn't let this go. Not this time. He wasn't sure how yet, but he was going to do something. He wasn't going to stay silent anymore. Later that night, after his mom had gone to bed, Jamal sat in front of his laptop, staring at the blank screen. His fingers hovered over the keys, unsure of what to write. He wanted to speak out, but where to start? Maybe he could post something on social media. Maybe he could write an open letter. He didn't know. But he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to let Mr. Whitmore's joke be the end of it. He was going to make sure people heard him. He was going to make sure this didn't happen to anyone else. And that was just the beginning. The night stretched on longer than Jamal had anticipated. His mind wouldn't quiet, and every time he tried to sleep, the sting of Mr. Whitmore's joke resurfaced. It had become like an itch he couldn't scratch, a painful reminder of how easily people could reduce him to a stereotype, a punchline. How a teacher, a person who was supposed to guide and educate, could think it was okay to make him the butt of a joke in front of his classmates. Jamal tossed and turned in his bed, his thoughts tangled in frustration. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the silence. Kayla's name flashed across the screen. "Hey, how's it going?" the message read. "I know you're probably still upset, but remember, you're not in this alone. I'm here for you, okay?" Jamal stared at the text for a few moments before responding. "I'm not sure what to do, Kayla," he typed back, his fingers slow as he tried to express what had been weighing on him all night. "I feel like I should do something, but what if it just makes things worse?" Kayla's reply came almost immediately. "You have every right to speak up. You shouldn't have to put up with that. If you want, we can talk tomorrow. Just don't let it eat at you, okay? We'll figure this out." He read her message again and felt a little bit of comfort. Kayla had always been there for him, since the days when they were both awkward, shy middle schoolers, now growing into teenagers who could understand the weight of the world in ways their peers couldn't. She wasn't just his best friend, she was his anchor. But still, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that what he was considering could go terribly wrong. The thing about speaking up is that it's easy to say, but the consequences are never clear. There would be backlash, there always was. His classmates might laugh it off, they might dismiss his feelings as overreacting. Or worse, what if Mr. Whitmore tried to make it seem like Jamal was the one causing trouble? Jamal sat up in his bed, glancing at the clock. It was well past midnight. His mind wandered to the faces of his classmates, those who had laughed along with Mr. Whitmore. He thought about the ones who hadn't said a word, the ones who stayed silent. Were they just as guilty? Did they believe the joke was okay? The doubt clouded his thoughts even more. He leaned back against his pillow and closed his eyes. In the quiet, his mom's words echoed in his mind, "You're not alone in this." And Kayla's words, "You have every right to speak up." But even with all that support, Jamal still wasn't sure. What was the right thing to do? What if speaking up made things worse, not just for him, but for everyone involved? The next morning came too quickly. Jamal's alarm buzzed at 7 a.m., and he groggily rolled out of bed. His head still felt heavy, like the weight of his own thoughts had anchored him to the mattress. The moment he stepped into the shower, he found himself thinking about Mr. Whitmore again, how his words had felt like they had carved something deep into Jamal's self-worth. It wasn't just about a joke anymore. It was about respect. It was about dignity. In the rush of getting dressed and packing his bag, Jamal found his mind drifting back to the incident in class. The awkward, uncomfortable silence after Mr. Whitmore's joke, the way everyone had looked at him expectantly. He didn't want to go back to school, not today. The idea of sitting in that same classroom, seeing the same faces, hearing that same voice, it made him sick to his stomach. But then, he thought of Kayla. He thought of his mom. He thought of how it felt to keep everything bottled up inside, how it had eaten at him for so long. Maybe it was time to do something about it. Maybe it was time to stand up. By the time Jamal stepped into the hallway of Riverwood High, he was already filled with a sense of dread. The hallway was packed with students, but everything felt different today. It felt like a waiting room, like everyone was waiting for something to happen, but no one was brave enough to make it happen. He saw Kayla a few feet ahead, her eyes meeting his. She gave him a small smile, but Jamal could see the concern in her eyes. "Hey," Kayla said, catching up to him as they walked toward their first class together. "You all right?" Jamal nodded, but it wasn't convincing. "I don't know. It's hard to just forget about it, you know. I don't think I can." Kayla didn't say anything for a moment, letting the silence stretch between them. Then, she finally spoke, her voice steady, her words simple. "You don't have to forget about it. But you don't have to let it define you either. This isn't your fault, Jamal. This is on Mr. Whitmore." The words stung, but they also gave him a sense of clarity. It wasn't his fault. He didn't have to carry the weight of Mr. Whitmore's ignorance, and he certainly didn't have to let that joke be the thing that defined his high school experience. He could speak up. He had to. When they entered the classroom, Jamal's heart began to race. He glanced around, noticing the familiar faces, some smiling, some staring blankly, all of them unaware of the storm brewing inside him. Mr. Whitmore, standing at the front of the class, flashed them a tired grin as they took their seats. He had no idea what was coming. Jamal sat down slowly, feeling the tension tighten in his chest. He couldn't focus on anything else. The lesson on the board might as well have been written in a foreign language, he could barely make sense of it. As the bell rang, signaling the beginning of class, Jamal stood up. It was now or never. His palms were sweating, his throat dry, but he took a deep breath and faced the front of the room. He was nervous. Terrified, actually. But this was something he had to do. "Mr. Whitmore," Jamal began, his voice louder than he expected it to be. The whole class fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. "I need to say something." Mr. Whitmore blinked, clearly taken aback, but he nodded. "Go ahead, Jamal." Jamal swallowed hard. The words were heavy, but they needed to be said. "Yesterday, when you made that joke about me, about my family, it wasn't funny. It was racist, and it hurt. I don't know if you even realized it, but it was wrong." For a moment, there was only silence. No one moved. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest, and he could feel his hands shaking. He braced himself for the backlash, for the laughter, for the uncomfortable silence that would follow. But instead, Mr. Whitmore seemed to soften, his expression changing from surprise to something else, something like regret. "I'm sorry, Jamal," Mr. Whitmore said quietly. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was trying to make a joke, but I see now that it wasn't appropriate." Jamal nodded, the tension in his chest easing just slightly. He wasn't sure if this was the resolution he had hoped for, but it was a start. As he returned to his seat, he felt a sense of relief. He had spoken up. He had taken the first step. And somehow, that made all the difference. The days following Jamal's confrontation with Mr. Whitmore were a whirlwind. He hadn't expected everything to be solved with one moment of courage. He didn't expect applause or admiration. But he also didn't expect the silence that followed, the cold, palpable tension that lingered in the air wherever he went. The first few hours after class felt like a fog. Jamal could barely focus on his other classes. His mind kept circling back to that moment, the one where he had stood up in front of the whole class. He had expected the worst, mockery, an angry teacher, maybe even retaliation. But instead, Mr. Whitmore had apologized. The entire room had gone eerily quiet after Jamal spoke, and when Mr. Whitmore's quiet apology came, Jamal had been left unsure how to feel. Was that enough? Was it genuine? But the real test came later, when the class went back to normal, or rather, tried to. At lunch, Jamal sat with Kayla and a few other friends in the cafeteria, but he noticed the looks. The glances. It was as if everyone was pretending everything was fine, but Jamal could sense the undercurrent of discomfort. The truth was, standing up to Mr. Whitmore wasn't going to just go away. The silence was louder than any words spoken. People were thinking about it. They were talking about it behind closed doors, wondering why Jamal had spoken up in the first place, and why he hadn't just let it slide. Kayla, noticing the tension in Jamal's shoulders, leaned over. "You okay?" she whispered, her eyes scanning the cafeteria. Jamal sighed. "I don't know, Kay. I thought it would feel better. But it's like, everything's different now. People are talking about it. Maybe they think I'm making a bigger deal out of it than it was." Kayla shook her head firmly. "Jamal, you did the right thing. Don't let them make you feel like you didn't." Jamal appreciated her words, but they didn't stop the lingering feeling of isolation. He felt like an outsider again, except this time, it wasn't because of the color of his skin or his background. This time, it was because he had stepped into territory no one else had dared to tread. He had disrupted the status quo. He had made the unspoken things suddenly spoken, and that made everyone uncomfortable. Later that day, in his second period class, things took an unexpected turn. Jamal walked in, late as usual, and the moment he entered, the whispers stopped. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward him. He felt the weight of their gazes, some judgmental, some curious, others unreadable. He tried to ignore it, but it was hard to. Every step he took felt like an echo in a room that wasn't ready to hear him. He sat down in his usual seat, the one in the middle of the classroom, away from the windows but close enough to the front to pay attention. But it wasn't the lesson that caught his attention, it was the way people kept stealing glances at him, like they were unsure whether to act normal or pretend nothing had changed. Then came the first test of Jamal's decision. It came in the form of Brett Matthews, a popular senior and one of the students who often tried to make funny remarks in class, often at someone else's expense. He had been one of the students who laughed the hardest at Mr. Whitmore's joke that day. Jamal hadn't forgotten it. Brett leaned over from his desk, his voice low enough for only Jamal to hear. "So, you're the hero now, huh?" He chuckled, clearly trying to provoke him. "You got what you wanted, right? The whole class is thinking about you, that's for sure." Jamal kept his gaze forward, pretending not to hear, but he could feel the tension rising in his chest. He wasn't sure how to respond. Part of him wanted to turn around and tell Brett off, but he knew that would only make it worse. The other part of him felt sick, realizing that the attention wasn't because of what he had done for himself, but because of the ripple effects he had created in an environment that had always been comfortable with silence. "Yeah," Jamal replied, his voice steady, but his hands clenched into fists beneath the desk. "I guess I am." Brett smirked. "Well, good luck with that. You can't expect everyone to be happy with the fact that you're rocking the boat." He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Guess it's your fight, not mine." Jamal didn't respond. He knew arguing with Brett wouldn't get him anywhere. But he also knew he wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when he had already taken this step. It wasn't about being the hero, it was about doing what was right. As the bell rang to dismiss class, Jamal gathered his things slowly. The students around him were murmuring, talking about the incident in hushed tones. Some of them were laughing, as if they thought this was all some kind of joke. Others were quiet, unsure what to say or how to act. But one person didn't say anything at all, Mr. Whitmore. He stood at his desk, his hands clasped together, his gaze fixed on his papers. Jamal caught his eye as he walked toward the door, and for a moment, their eyes locked. Mr. Whitmore didn't smile. He didn't wave goodbye. He simply nodded in a way that felt uncertain. That nod left Jamal with a strange sense of discomfort. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement. It was more like a gesture that said, "I don't know how to fix this, either." The rest of the day passed in a blur of awkward encounters. In the hallways, Jamal caught whispers, sideways glances, and the occasional chuckle. It wasn't just the students, some of the teachers, too, seemed to avoid his gaze, unsure how to react to the new dynamic. Some students approached him, unsure of how to start a conversation, while others flat out ignored him. At the end of the day, as Jamal trudged home, he felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. His mom wasn't home yet, and he found himself sitting in the living room, staring at the wall, wondering if this was what he had expected when he stood up for himself. Was this the change he had hoped for? The discomfort? The isolation? The door creaked open, and Maria stepped in, her arms full of grocery bags. She gave Jamal a quick, worried glance but said nothing as she began putting the groceries away. "How was school?" she asked, her tone casual, but Jamal could hear the concern behind it. "It was, okay," Jamal muttered, not looking up. "I guess." Maria didn't push him. Instead, she sat beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did what you thought was right, Jamal. That's what matters. Don't let anyone make you feel small because of it." Jamal nodded, but deep down, he wasn't so sure. The aftermath was more complicated than he had anticipated. Speaking up hadn't made things better, it had made things more complicated. But he couldn't back down now. He couldn't let the discomfort of others silence him. He just hoped he was strong enough to see it through. The next few days at Riverwood High felt like walking through a storm. Jamal had hoped that, after his confrontation with Mr. Whitmore, things would calm down, that he would return to normal. But there was no normal anymore. Each day brought with it new encounters, subtle barbs, sideways glances, and a silence that spoke volumes. It wasn't just the students like Brett Matthews who made Jamal feel like an outsider. There were others, too, the ones who hadn't laughed at the joke but hadn't said anything when Jamal stood up for himself either. They watched from the sidelines, observing, waiting for the next move. It was clear they didn't know where they stood with Jamal anymore. And honestly, neither did he. One of the worst moments came during history class, the next period after lunch. Jamal had always done well in history, enjoying the subject because it gave him context for the world around him, a way to understand the systems that had shaped his life and the lives of others. But today, it felt different. He sat at his desk, trying to focus on the lecture, but the silence in the room was unbearable. It was as if everyone was waiting for him to do something, anything, just to break the tension. Mr. Anderson, the history teacher, was talking about the civil rights movement, a topic Jamal knew well. His mind should have been engaged in the lesson, but instead, his thoughts kept drifting to his classmates, the ones who had become distant ever since the incident with Mr. Whitmore. As the lesson went on, Jamal's hand instinctively went to his phone under the desk. His fingers swiped the screen to check messages, anything to distract him. He noticed a notification from Kayla, "How's it going? I'm here if you need to talk." He quickly typed back, "It's rough. People keep staring at me like I'm some kind of troublemaker." She responded almost instantly, "I know. You're doing the right thing though. Don't let them get to you. You're not the one who messed up." The bell rang before Jamal could reply, and he stuffed his phone back into his bag, wishing he could just disappear. As he walked out of class, Jamal was greeted by a few familiar faces, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. It was as if they were unsure whether to say something, afraid of being associated with him in a way that might make them targets too. It wasn't the kind of isolation that was obvious, it was quieter, more insidious. It was the feeling of being invisible in a room full of people. And for Jamal, it stung. He was halfway down the hall when he heard a voice calling his name. It was Alex, a kid from his geometry class who had always been friendly, but not particularly close to Jamal. "Yo, Jamal. Wait up." Jamal turned, raising an eyebrow. "What's up?" Alex came closer, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Look, I just wanted to say. I didn't agree with what Mr. Whitmore said. I thought it was messed up too. But, You really shouldn't have called him out like that in front of the whole class. It was a little, dramatic. Jamal felt the heat rise in his chest. Dramatic? You're saying I shouldn't have said anything at all? Alex shifted on his feet, clearly uneasy. I'm just saying, maybe it wasn't the best way to handle it. I get it, you're upset, but making a scene like that? Now everybody's talking about it, and it's like, well, it's causing more problems. Jamal's mind raced, a mix of anger and frustration building inside him. He had been hoping for support from his peers, not this kind of dismissal. You think staying quiet about it would have made it better? Jamal shot back, his voice steady but filled with underlying tension. You think pretending it didn't happen would have solved anything? Alex's expression softened slightly, but he still seemed uncertain. Look, I didn't mean to. Whatever, Jamal muttered, cutting him off. Maybe you're right. Maybe making a scene was the problem. He didn't wait for Alex's response, turning on his heel and walking away. He didn't care anymore about whether people understood. He had said his piece. He had stood up for himself. He wasn't going to let anyone tell him how he should feel or what he should have done. Later that afternoon, Jamal found himself walking home from school, the weight of his emotions pulling him down. He had just finished a tense phone call with his mom, who had wanted to know how things were going. Jamal had told her everything, but it still felt like he was hiding parts of himself, parts that were too messy, too raw for her to fully understand. The air was thick with the smell of fresh rain, the sidewalk still damp from earlier in the day. Jamal wasn't even sure where he was going, his steps felt automatic, like his body was carrying him somewhere without his permission. He passed familiar landmarks, the old diner where he and Kayla used to hang out, the park where he'd practiced basketball as a kid, but none of them held any comfort today. Everything felt distant, like he was walking through a world that no longer made sense. His phone buzzed again, and this time it was from his dad. Son, I heard about what happened. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. But don't let it get to you. The world will try to make you small, but don't let it. Jamal paused in the middle of the street, staring at the message. His dad's words hit him harder than he expected. He had always admired his dad's calm, unshakable confidence. His father, a man who had faced his own challenges in life, had always taught Jamal to be strong in the face of adversity. But now, standing on this street, Jamal felt anything but strong. He felt small, vulnerable, and unsure of how much longer he could carry the weight of his decision. When he got home, he sat at the kitchen table, picking at the food his mom had made. She was in the living room, watching TV, but Jamal couldn't find the energy to join her. He just needed to be alone, to think. The next day at school, the tension was unbearable. Jamal could feel the eyes of the entire student body on him, but no one dared to speak. The distance between him and everyone else seemed to grow with each passing hour. He was beginning to realize that standing up for what was right didn't come without a cost. It had made him an outsider, a target. But what hurt the most was that, in many ways, he was the only one who truly understood why it mattered. But there was still something inside of him that refused to give up. He wasn't ready to let the silence define him, no matter how hard it became. The days were starting to blur together. Jamal wasn't sure how long it had been since the incident with Mr. Whitmore, but it felt like a lifetime. Every day, every class, every hallway, the weight of the situation hung over him like a thick fog. It was as if he was walking through a world that was slowly shrinking around him, pulling him further away from the things he once knew and trusted. He sat in his geometry class on Monday, eyes focused on the whiteboard, but his mind was elsewhere. His body was here, but his thoughts had long since drifted to the familiar sound of laughter in the halls, the whispers behind his back. It felt like everyone had an opinion on what had happened, even those who hadn't said a word to him in the aftermath. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but Jamal didn't move. He stayed in his seat, pretending to sort through his backpack, hoping to avoid the awkward interactions that were sure to come. He could feel eyes on him as the rest of the students filed out of the room. When the last person had left, Jamal finally stood up, letting out a long breath. He turned to gather his things when he saw Mr. Whitmore standing by the door, arms folded, watching him. The teacher looked different today. His usual expression of mild indifference was replaced by something more uncertain. Mr. Whitmore had barely said a word to Jamal since the confrontation, but now, he stepped forward, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Jamal, can we talk?" Jamal stiffened. He hadn't expected to be called out like this. He had hoped Mr. Whitmore would just pretend like it never happened, like the rest of the school had tried to do. But here they were, facing each other, the air thick with unresolved tension. "Sure," Jamal muttered, already wanting to get it over with. Mr. Whitmore motioned toward the door, and Jamal followed him into the empty hallway. The noise of students moving between classes and the occasional shout from the gymnasium were distant, creating an eerie silence between them. "Listen," Mr. Whitmore started, rubbing his temples, "I want to apologize again for what happened. I've had time to think about it, and I realize it was wrong. You were right to stand up for yourself. I was out of line." He paused, looking at Jamal with a mix of guilt and concern. "But I also want you to understand something. When you did that in front of the whole class, it created some tension. People are talking, Jamal. Not all of it is positive." Jamal looked at Mr. Whitmore, surprised by the teacher's candidness. He had expected more of a defensive reaction, but here was this apology, mixed with an attempt to explain himself. "You're telling me this is my fault?" Jamal's voice was low, trying to control the irritation rising in his chest. "You're the one who made a joke. I didn't ask for this to happen. I didn't ask to be put on the spot." Mr. Whitmore looked away, clearly struggling. "No, I'm not saying it's your fault. But what I'm trying to say is that, sometimes, in situations like this, there's fallout. It's not just about standing up for what's right. There are consequences, Jamal. And people are going to react in ways that you can't control." Jamal clenched his fists, feeling the old anger flare up. "So, what? I should have just let it slide. Just kept my mouth shut and kept playing along like everything's fine." His voice was getting louder, the frustration spilling out. "You don't get it. You have no idea what it's like. What it's like to be the one they all look at and judge, the one they all think is trouble, the one who's not supposed to speak up." Mr. Whitmore took a step back, his expression softening. "I get it, Jamal. I do. But just know this, it's not easy for anyone when you make a stand like that. It changes things, and not always for the better. You've got to be ready for that." Jamal swallowed hard, staring at the teacher, trying to process everything. "I don't know if I'm ready for any of this," he muttered. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of it." For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. Jamal wanted to walk away, but something in Mr. Whitmore's words made him stay. He had wanted validation, a confirmation that he had done the right thing, but instead, he was left with a reality check. Standing up for what was right wasn't supposed to feel easy. It wasn't supposed to feel like victory. "I don't want you to think I'm trying to downplay what you did," Mr. Whitmore said softly, "but just, understand that this is going to be harder than you think." Jamal nodded slowly, his throat tight. "I'm trying. I just don't know if it's worth it." Mr. Whitmore sighed. "You'll figure it out. You've got a good head on your shoulders, Jamal. Just don't let the weight of it all change who you are. Don't let it make you silent when you know you should speak." Jamal didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. Mr. Whitmore's words were comforting in a way, but they also felt like a warning. He had been brave in the moment, but now that the immediate tension had passed, Jamal was starting to realize the true cost of speaking out. When Jamal finally walked out of the hallway and back into the crowded school, he felt the weight of it all hit him again. He wasn't sure what he had expected from that conversation. Maybe he had hoped for a magical moment where everything would fall back into place, where Mr. Whitmore would tell him that everything was going to be okay. But that hadn't happened. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. Later that evening, as Jamal sat at the dinner table with his mom, Maria noticed the distant look in his eyes. "How was school today?" she asked, setting down a plate of food in front of him. Jamal glanced up from his plate, his mind still reeling from the conversation with Mr. Whitmore. "Same as usual. People still talking about it. I don't think anyone gets it." Maria gave him a soft, understanding smile. "You've got to let people figure it out for themselves, Jamal. You can't control how they react to what you did. But you know what's right. You know you didn't do anything wrong." Jamal looked down at his plate, pushing the food around absently. "I don't know, Mom. It's hard. I feel like I'm alone in this." Maria reached across the table and took his hand. "You're not alone. You have me, and you have your dad. And you'll find other people who understand. You just have to stay true to yourself." Jamal squeezed her hand and nodded. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was something. Maybe, just maybe, he could hold on to that. The next few days felt like Jamal was stuck in a never-ending cycle of whispers, side glances, and the weight of judgment pressing down on him from all directions. He couldn't escape it. The moment he stepped into school, it was like the air itself became thick with the tension he felt from every person around him. It wasn't just the students anymore. Teachers were avoiding eye contact, and even the custodian seemed to move out of his way as he walked down the hall. The whole school had become a giant maze of invisible walls, and Jamal was stuck in the center, trying to find his way out. But there was no escape. Not from the gossip, not from the assumptions, not from the lingering feeling that he had made a choice that couldn't be undone. He had hoped that things would settle down. That by now, people would have moved on and things would return to normal. But instead, they'd become quieter, more subtle in their judgments. The isolation didn't always show on the outside, but Jamal felt it every minute of the day. Kayla had tried to cheer him up when they walked to their lockers together the next morning. "Hey, you doing okay?" she asked, nudging him with her shoulder as they approached their respective lockers. Jamal forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just, you know. Same old stuff." Kayla didn't buy it. She knew him too well. "You're not fine, Jamal. I can see it. You've been avoiding me all week," she said, a slight edge to her voice. Jamal hesitated before answering. "It's just, everything's different now. People are looking at me like I'm some kind of troublemaker." Kayla frowned, but there was a fire in her eyes. "You're not a troublemaker. You stood up for yourself. For what's right. They're just scared because you did what they were too afraid to do." Jamal wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe Kayla, who had always been his biggest supporter. But the reality of it all was more complicated. He had made his stand, but the world around him wasn't giving him any grace. It was pushing him further into isolation, making him question whether his actions had truly been worth it. "I don't know if it was worth it," he admitted quietly. "The joke, the way people are acting. I don't even know if I made the right choice anymore." Kayla stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Jamal, listen to me. You did the right thing. No matter how much they try to make you feel bad about it, you know what happened. You know what was wrong. And you stood up for it. That's not something everyone can say." Jamal felt a lump form in his throat. He appreciated her words, but they didn't ease the growing knot of doubt and frustration inside him. "It's hard, Kayla. I'm not used to this. Not used to being the one everyone's watching, everyone's whispering about." Kayla gave him a look that was a mixture of concern and understanding. "I know it's hard. But you're not alone in this. I'm here for you, okay? Always. You don't have to do this by yourself." Jamal looked at her, the heaviness in his chest loosening just a bit. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of something like hope. Maybe Kayla was right. Maybe this wasn't the end of everything. Maybe he could still find a way through this, if he just held on a little longer. That afternoon, during lunch, Jamal and Kayla sat together at their usual spot in the cafeteria. The room was as noisy and chaotic as ever, but for Jamal, it felt like he was sitting in a different world. The laughter, the chatter, it all sounded muffled, distant, as if he were trapped in his own bubble. Every time he looked around, he saw eyes flicking toward him, some curious, some judgmental. Brett Matthews and his group of friends passed by, snickering as they made their way to the other side of the room. Jamal couldn't help but feel his stomach tighten. He didn't know if they were still talking about him, but the way they looked at him made it clear they had something to say. "Do you think they're still making fun of me?" Jamal asked, his voice quiet, as he glanced at Kayla. She followed his gaze, her brow furrowing. "They are. But don't let it get to you. You know what they are. They're not worth your time." Jamal nodded, but the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. He didn't have to hear their words to know what they thought. It was written all over their faces. As the lunch period continued, Jamal tried his best to push the negativity aside. He focused on his sandwich, forcing himself to take bites, even though he wasn't hungry. His mind kept wandering back to the conversation with Mr. Whitmore earlier in the week. The teacher's words echoed in his mind, "There are consequences. You've got to be ready for that." Jamal hadn't expected the consequences to feel so suffocating. But as he looked around the cafeteria, something began to shift. Amid the whispers, he saw something unexpected. A few students who had never spoken to him before were looking at him, not with disdain, but with something more like respect. There was Jenna, a shy girl from his English class, who caught his eye and gave him a small, encouraging smile. Across the room, he noticed Marcus, one of the basketball players, who gave him a subtle nod before turning away. It was small, but it was enough. For the first time in days, Jamal felt a spark of something like validation. Maybe, just maybe, standing up for himself had made a difference. Maybe it wasn't just about the people who were against him, but the ones who did understand. That afternoon, as Jamal walked home from school, he reflected on the moments during lunch. Kayla was right. It wasn't about pleasing everyone. It was about staying true to who he was, even when it felt like the world was trying to tear him down. It wasn't going to be easy. But Jamal realized, maybe for the first time, that he was stronger than he had given himself credit for. And even though the journey ahead would be filled with more challenges, at least he wasn't facing it alone. The following week, Jamal tried his best to ignore the whispers. He walked through the hallways with his head high, forcing himself to act like the tension didn't exist. He had grown used to the sideways glances and the way people avoided him in the cafeteria, but today was different. Today, something felt lighter. It was a Friday morning, and as Jamal shuffled into history class, he noticed a change in the air. His usual spot at the back of the classroom was empty, and there was someone sitting there. Someone unexpected. Kayla was sitting at the desk in the corner, flipping through her notebook, completely unaware of the shift in the room. Jamal smiled slightly as he walked toward her, his feet dragging with reluctance. The strange sensation of his classmates' eyes still on him followed him across the room like a shadow. But there was something about seeing Kayla already there, the comfort of knowing she was a constant, that made him feel like he wasn't entirely alone in this. When he sat down beside her, she looked up and gave him a knowing look. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft enough for only him to hear. Jamal nodded, although the feeling of unease still lingered. "Yeah, it's been a weird week. But you know, I'm getting through it." Kayla didn't push him to elaborate, but she didn't need to. They both knew the silence was more than just a pause, it was a shield. The kind of silence that protected the both of them from digging too deep into emotions they weren't ready to confront yet. The bell rang, and their teacher, Mr. Jenkins, shuffled into the classroom with his usual disheveled appearance. He cleared his throat, and the room quieted immediately. Jamal tried not to let the thought of how awkward things were with Mr. Jenkins distract him. Ever since the incident, Jamal had noticed the teacher's hesitation around him, almost like he was afraid to say the wrong thing. Mr. Jenkins started the class, talking about the civil rights movement, a topic that hit close to home for Jamal in ways he hadn't expected. As he listened to the lesson unfold, something clicked inside him. Here, in this room, in this moment, he was learning about people who had fought against all odds for what was right. People who had stood up, even when the world was trying to tear them down. The parallels were undeniable. Jamal wasn't on the front lines of any major historical event, but in his own way, he was standing up. Standing up for himself, for what he believed in. Halfway through the lesson, Jamal caught a glance from someone he didn't expect, Marcus. The basketball player, who had once brushed past him without a second thought, was looking directly at him. At first, Jamal thought it was a fluke, but then Marcus smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile, like the ones Jamal had grown used to. No, this was different. This was genuine. Jamal gave a hesitant smile back before turning his attention back to the lesson. He couldn't quite figure out what had shifted, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like maybe the world wasn't entirely against him. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. At lunch, things weren't as quiet as Jamal had feared. When he and Kayla sat down at their usual spot, there was an unexpected presence. It was Jenna, the quiet girl from Jamal's English class. She smiled shyly as she slid into the seat beside him. Jamal blinked, surprised by her sudden appearance. He hadn't expected to see her there, especially not after everything that had happened. "Hey, Jamal," she said softly. I just wanted to say that I think what you did was really brave. You didn't deserve what happened with Mr. Whitmore, and I just wanted you to know that." Jamal didn't know how to respond. Jenna wasn't the type of person who usually spoke up, let alone to him. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Jamal feel like there was at least one person in this school who understood. "Thanks," he finally said, his voice softer than usual. "I appreciate that. It's been tough, but it means a lot to hear that from you." Kayla shot him a knowing look, and Jamal couldn't help but smile. The shift in perspective was slow, but it was happening. For the first time, he was starting to see that maybe standing up for himself hadn't just made things worse. Maybe, it had opened doors to a new kind of understanding. But as much as Jamal appreciated Jenna's words, the doubts still lingered. He was still stuck in the middle of a battle, one that didn't have an easy resolution. The small victories, the nods of respect from Marcus, the support from Kayla and Jenna, it wasn't enough to erase the fear that gnawed at him every day. Later that afternoon, Jamal's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a text from his mom. "How was school today? Any better?" Jamal stared at the message for a moment, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest. It had been hard to tell her the truth, how he was struggling with the weight of everything that had happened. How it felt like his world was slowly crumbling, piece by piece. He typed back. "It's getting better. Slowly. I'm trying, Mom." He sent the message and sat back in his seat, looking out the window. The sky outside was overcast, and the gray clouds seemed to match his mood. But beneath the cloud cover, there was a flicker of light. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was something. Something to hold on to. That night, after dinner, Jamal went up to his room and closed the door behind him. He sat at his desk, staring at his homework, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to everything that had happened, his confrontation with Mr. Whitmore, the looks from his classmates, the quiet nods of respect from people like Marcus and Jenna. Maybe he wasn't alone in this after all. Maybe there were more people who understood than he realized. Maybe, just maybe, he could make it through this storm, if he kept moving forward, one step at a time. He glanced down at his phone, seeing a new message from Kayla. "I'm proud of you. Keep your head up. Things are changing." Jamal smiled at the message, feeling a warmth spread through him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a while, he felt like there was hope. Hope, like the faint glimmer of light that pierced through the clouds, showing him a way forward. Monday morning arrived, and Jamal found himself staring blankly at his alarm clock. It was 7:15 a.m. His school day would start in less than an hour, but for some reason, the idea of stepping back into that environment filled him with a deep sense of dread. The weekend had given him a break from the constant weight of judgment and whispers, but now the reality of it all was settling back in. He pulled himself out of bed and trudged to the bathroom, trying to shake off the heaviness in his chest. The mirror reflected a tired version of himself, his eyes slightly red from not sleeping well the night before. He had been replaying the events of the past few weeks in his mind, trying to figure out if he could have done something differently, or if the outcome was inevitable. The conflict with Mr. Whitmore, the way everything spiraled out of control after that, it all felt like a never-ending storm. Jamal didn't know if he was strong enough to weather it anymore. By the time Jamal walked into school, he had steeled himself for what was to come. His backpack felt heavier than usual, and not just from the weight of his books. It was the emotional toll that was starting to wear on him, and it made the simple act of walking through the halls seem like a monumental task. He caught sight of Kayla standing by the lockers, waiting for him as she always did. When she saw him approaching, she smiled, but there was a concern behind her eyes. She could always tell when he was having a hard time, even if he didn't say anything. "Hey," she said softly as he reached her. "You okay?" Jamal hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking around the hallway as people moved past them, some glancing at him, others whispering under their breath. The stares and whispers were starting to get to him again, and he didn't want to admit to Kayla just how badly it was affecting him. "I'm fine," he muttered, trying to sound convincing. But Kayla wasn't buying it. "No, you're not," she said gently. "I can see it. You've been avoiding me all weekend, and now you're shutting me out. What's going on?" Jamal sighed, looking down at his shoes. The weight of everything, the confrontation with Mr. Whitmore, the rumors that had followed him, and the isolation he felt, was starting to feel unbearable. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every day it feels like I'm walking around with a target on my back. I'm so tired of being the center of all this." Kayla's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his arm, squeezing it reassuringly. "I know it's hard, Jamal. I can't pretend to understand exactly what you're going through, but I do know this: what you did wasn't easy, but it was the right thing. And people who respect you will see that. It'll get better, I promise." Jamal nodded, though he didn't fully believe her words. The doubt and uncertainty were like a storm cloud hovering over him, casting everything in a gray light. But the way Kayla stood beside him, unwavering and confident in her belief that he had done the right thing, made him want to hold on to that hope. Even if it was faint. The school day dragged on. Jamal found it hard to concentrate in his classes, his mind constantly wandering back to the fallout of the previous weeks. During history class, Mr. Jenkins seemed to be making an effort to avoid any direct interaction with him, which only made Jamal feel more uncomfortable. Every time he looked up at the board or at the other students, he felt like he was invisible in the worst possible way. The room, once full of energy and engagement, now felt like a suffocating space, where every glance toward him felt like another judgment. At lunch, Jamal found himself sitting with Kayla and Jenna, the familiar faces offering him a small comfort amid the chaos of the cafeteria. The noise of students around them seemed to fade as the trio settled into their usual routine, eating their food and talking about anything but the situation at school. But as they were about to finish, Jamal's attention was caught by a group of students at the far end of the cafeteria. It was a small group, Brett Matthews and his usual crew, but Jamal noticed something odd. For the first time since the incident, they weren't mocking him. Instead, they were talking to him. Brett's voice, loud and unmistakable, cut through the chatter. "Yo, Jamal. You're coming to the game on Friday, right?" His tone wasn't aggressive, like it had been in the past. It wasn't mocking either. It was casual. Almost friendly. Jamal blinked, unsure of how to respond. Brett had never spoken to him like this before. Not since the incident. Kayla leaned in closer, her voice low. Don't let it get to your head. They're just trying to act like nothing happened. Don't fall for it. Jamal nodded, but his mind was racing. Had something shifted with Brett? Was this an olive branch, or was it just another attempt to manipulate him? I'm not sure, Jamal replied, his voice distant. Maybe. But it's hard to know who's really on my side. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Jamal couldn't shake the unease he felt from the lunchroom interaction. Brett Matthews, the same guy who had made Jamal feel like an outsider just a few weeks ago, now seemed to be offering him a place back in the fold. But Jamal wasn't sure he wanted to go back to the way things were. If he went back, what would that say about everything he had stood up for? That night, Jamal lay in bed, the thoughts swirling in his mind like a tornado. He couldn't sleep. The pressure of it all, the uncertainty, the feelings of betrayal, the subtle shifts in how people viewed him, was starting to feel like too much. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand and opened the messages Kayla had sent him earlier that day. Her words were still there, a small anchor to hold on to. I'm proud of you. Keep your head up. Things are changing. Maybe she was right. Maybe things were changing, just not in the way he had imagined. He had wanted the world to change overnight, for everything to settle down and return to how it was before the incident. But maybe that wasn't realistic. Maybe he had to accept that change took time, and sometimes it came in unexpected forms. The next morning, as Jamal walked through the halls of school, he felt that familiar weight pressing down on him. But there was something different this time. It wasn't just the whispers, the sideways glances. There was a shift, he wasn't the only one watching. The world around him was changing, too. And for once, Jamal was starting to feel like maybe he didn't have to carry all of it on his own. The next week felt like a series of emotional twists and turns for Jamal. Each day, he was forced to confront the unease that followed him around like a shadow. He'd hoped that by now, everything would have calmed down, that the tension from the incident with Mr. Whitmore would have settled. But it hadn't. It lingered. Jamal was beginning to feel the weight of his actions. The world outside his small circle was watching him, scrutinizing his every move. But it wasn't just the stares and whispers that bothered him anymore. It was the fact that every person he interacted with had an opinion about what had happened, and he couldn't tell who really had his back. It was Monday morning, and Jamal walked through the hallway, his backpack slung over his shoulder, his steps heavy. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. The whispers were louder today. He couldn't pinpoint why, maybe it was the fact that the whole school seemed to be waiting for him to slip up. Or maybe it was the way everyone had started treating him like some kind of celebrity. Some saw him as a hero, others as a troublemaker. But for Jamal, none of those labels seemed to fit. He wasn't sure what he was anymore. He spotted Kayla by the lockers again, waiting for him. Her presence was a small relief, a brief reprieve from the uncertainty that plagued him. She was the one person who made him feel like he wasn't completely alone. Morning, she greeted him, her voice warm as she smiled. You ready for today? Jamal didn't answer immediately. Instead, he ran his fingers through his hair, sighing as he leaned against the locker beside her. I don't know. I keep wondering if I made the right choice, you know. It's like, no matter what I do, there's always someone who thinks I'm wrong. I can't win. Kayla looked at him with a mixture of concern and understanding. Jamal, you did make the right choice. You stood up for yourself when no one else would. That's something most people don't have the guts to do. I know, but it's hard, Kayla, Jamal said, his voice quiet. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. I didn't just stand up to Mr. Whitmore, I stood up to everyone, to everything. And now, I feel like I'm just stuck. Like there's no way out of this. Kayla's expression softened, and she reached out, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "You're not stuck. It's going to take time for things to settle. You're not going to have all the answers right away, and that's okay. You've done something important. You've made people think." Jamal nodded, but the doubt still lingered. He appreciated Kayla's words, but they felt distant, almost as though she was offering him something he couldn't grasp. The tension he was feeling was so real, so suffocating, that it felt impossible to move forward. As they walked to their first class, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whispers followed him through the hallways, and as he entered history class, he couldn't help but notice the way Mr. Jenkins was looking at him. The teacher's eyes held a kind of apology mixed with hesitation, as though he was afraid of making things worse. Jamal met his gaze, but he didn't return the apology. Mr. Jenkins had been the one to create this mess, and Jamal wasn't about to pretend everything was fine. The class went by in a blur, and before Jamal knew it, it was lunchtime. He sat down at his usual spot with Kayla and Jenna, his stomach twisting in knots as the cafeteria chatter buzzed around them. "I saw you talking to Marcus earlier," Kayla remarked, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What was that about?" Jamal hesitated before answering. "He just said something about the game on Friday. It was weird. I don't know what to make of it." "Marcus?" Jenna echoed with surprise. "That's strange. He's not exactly known for being the nicest guy." "I don't know. It just felt different. He's been acting like things are normal again, like what happened didn't even matter." "But it does matter, doesn't it? He can't just ignore what went down." Jamal's voice was edged with frustration. "I don't even know where I stand with people anymore." Kayla gave him a thoughtful look. "Maybe he's trying to reach out. Maybe he's trying to make amends in his own way. I know it's hard, but not everyone's going to know how to handle the situation. People are still figuring it out." Jamal stared at his food, his fork tapping against his tray. Kayla's words had a point, but it wasn't that simple. He wasn't sure he could just forgive Marcus for everything. How could he, after everything that had happened? "Do you think it's worth it?" Jamal asked quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Trying to fix things with people like Marcus? With all of them?" There was a brief pause before Kayla answered. "Only you can decide that, Jamal. But what I know for sure is that you shouldn't have to carry the weight of their mistakes. What happened with Mr. Whitmore wasn't your fault. What they do or don't do is up to them. You've got to take care of yourself first." Jamal looked at her, her words settling over him like a warm blanket. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to be strong enough to let go of all the anger, to forgive the people who had treated him poorly. But the truth was, he wasn't sure if he was ready for that yet. The rest of the week unfolded in a haze of uncertainty. Jamal continued to navigate the awkwardness at school, trying to stay under the radar while dealing with the emotional toll of the situation. Every interaction, every glance felt like it carried more weight than it should. And then, on Thursday, something unexpected happened. Jamal was walking out of his last class when he saw Mr. Whitmore standing by the door, waiting for him. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen the teacher outside of class since the confrontation, and Jamal didn't know what to expect. Mr. Whitmore looked different. He was no longer the confident, almost dismissive figure he had been when they first met. Instead, there was a kind of wariness in his eyes, as though he was unsure of how to approach Jamal. "Jamal," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice soft. I wanted to apologize for what happened. For how I treated you. It wasn't right." Jamal stood there for a moment, the shock of hearing those words paralyzing him. He had never expected Mr. Whitmore to apologize, not in a million years. But there it was, hanging in the air between them. "I'm sorry, too," Jamal finally replied, his voice surprisingly steady. "For the way everything went down. For the way I reacted." Mr. Whitmore nodded, his gaze softening. "I appreciate that. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that I've learned from this. I've seen things differently. You did the right thing. Jamal wasn't sure how to respond. Part of him wanted to hold on to his anger, to make Mr. Whitmore pay for the way he had treated him. But there was another part of him, a quieter part, that knew forgiveness didn't have to mean forgetting. Thanks, Jamal said finally, his voice calm. I appreciate you saying that. As he walked away, Jamal couldn't help but feel a shift within himself. Maybe it wasn't about finding the perfect resolution, or having everyone see things his way. Maybe it was just about moving forward, about letting go of the anger and accepting that people were flawed, including himself. Jamal's footsteps echoed down the empty hallway as he walked to his next class. The school felt strangely quiet today, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Maybe it was the weight of the lingering tension, or maybe it was just Jamal's perception. He had started feeling like he was walking on a tightrope, uncertain of every step he took. Ever since Mr. Whitmore had apologized to him the day before, Jamal had been reflecting on the way he'd handled everything. The confrontation, his reaction, the fallout, it had all been so overwhelming that he hadn't taken the time to consider how his choices had affected others. Not just Mr. Whitmore, or his classmates, but people who had been watching from the sidelines. People who had their own struggles, their own battles they were facing. For the first time in weeks, Jamal felt the stirrings of guilt. He had spent so much time focusing on how he was wronged, on the hurt he had experienced, that he hadn't stopped to think about the people who had stood by him, the people who had been impacted by his actions. Kayla. Jenna. His mom. Even Mr. Whitmore, who had ultimately apologized. And yes, Marcus. The whole school, really. The weight of it all began to settle on his chest as he entered the classroom. He quickly found his seat, trying to shake off the lingering thoughts, but they wouldn't go away. They kept pushing him, forcing him to consider something he wasn't sure he was ready for. What kind of person did he want to be moving forward? As the bell rang, signaling the start of class, Jamal sat back and tried to focus. But his mind kept drifting. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, even though no one was overtly staring. It was the kind of scrutiny that you could feel in your bones, a constant awareness that your actions were being watched, judged, and discussed. Jamal couldn't help but wonder how many of them saw him as a symbol of something bigger. Were they looking at him like a hero, a troublemaker, or something else entirely? Kayla had been right about one thing, he wasn't stuck. But that didn't make it any easier to figure out where he was headed. Later that day, during lunch, Jamal met Kayla and Jenna in their usual spot. He sat down heavily, pushing his tray aside without touching the food. His thoughts were swirling, and he didn't have the energy to pretend everything was fine. "What's up?" Jenna asked, her voice casual, but her eyes sharp. She knew Jamal well enough to recognize when something was bothering him. Jamal sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice low. "I think I messed up. Not just with Mr. Whitmore, but with everything. I didn't really think about how my actions affected everyone else. I've been so focused on what happened to me, but I didn't consider how other people were feeling, or how they were impacted by the fallout." Kayla gave him a sympathetic look. "It's hard, Jamal. You were the one in the hot seat. You've had so much to process, and it's not like you've had a guidebook for this." "I know, but I'm just starting to realize that my actions don't happen in a vacuum," Jamal continued. "Other people were affected too, like you guys. You've been by my side, but it's also put you in the middle of all this. And I don't know if that's fair." Jenna shook her head, leaning forward with a smile. "Jamal, we chose to be here with you. No one's forcing us to be your friends. We know you, and we're with you because we want to be. Don't ever think we're in this because we have to be." Kayla nodded. "Exactly. But Jamal, you can't carry all of this on your own. You're not supposed to. We all have our own battles, our own struggles. But if we're going to get through this together, you've got to stop blaming yourself for everything that happened. You did the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good or easy, but that doesn't mean it was wrong. Jamal looked between them, his chest tight with emotion. I just don't know if I can keep being strong. Some days, it feels like everything is falling apart, and I'm just trying to hold it together. I don't want to drag you guys into this anymore. I don't want to be the source of all this drama. Kayla reached across the table, placing her hand on his. You're not a burden, Jamal. You're our friend. And yeah, this situation sucks, but we'll get through it. Together. But that means you have to let us in. You don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to do everything on your own. It's okay to lean on us. Jamal exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly. He had never realized how much weight he had been carrying until now. The weight of expectation, of other people's opinions, of trying to manage it all on his own. Maybe Kayla was right. Maybe it was okay to let people help him, to let himself be vulnerable. He looked up, meeting Kayla's eyes. Thanks, he said, his voice sincere. I've been so focused on trying to figure everything out by myself that I forgot I don't have to do this alone. The rest of the week passed in a similar emotional haze. Jamal continued to struggle with his place in the world, but he began to see things more clearly. The situation with Mr. Whitmore had opened his eyes to the complexities of his actions, but it had also shown him that growth wasn't a linear path. It wasn't about perfection, it was about learning, evolving, and allowing himself to make mistakes without letting them define him. One day after school, as Jamal walked home, he ran into Marcus. It was an unexpected encounter. Marcus had never approached him before, not like this. Hey, Marcus called out, walking up to Jamal with his hands in his pockets. Can we talk for a minute? Jamal stopped, surprised by the directness. Sure. Marcus gave him a tentative smile. I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. For everything. The way things went down. I don't know if you want to hear it, but I felt like I owed you an apology. Jamal studied him, unsure of how to respond. He hadn't expected this from Marcus. The apology felt both genuine and awkward, and for a moment, Jamal didn't know what to do with it. Why now? Jamal asked, his voice a little guarded. Why apologize after everything? Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. I guess. I didn't really get it until recently. I was caught up in all the drama, and I didn't stop to think about how my actions affected you. I'm not proud of that. I think I just wanted to be part of the crowd, but I get now that that's not the kind of person I want to be. Jamal nodded slowly, his mind processing the words. I get that, he said quietly. And I appreciate the apology. But it's gonna take time to trust you again, Marcus. You can't just undo everything that happened. But maybe we can start over. For the first time in a long while, Jamal felt the slightest weight lift from his chest. The world hadn't become perfect overnight, but this small act of accountability, this willingness to admit mistakes, was a step in the right direction. Maybe there was hope for him, for Marcus, and for everyone involved. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jamal stared out the window of his room, the late afternoon light filtering through the blinds. The days had begun to blend together, but he felt different now. There was something about this time, the shift in his mindset, that made everything feel like it was moving towards something. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. And that was enough for him. The tension at school had eased a little. The whispers and stares had died down, but they hadn't completely disappeared. Jamal knew that even though things had calmed, the effects of the incident would stick around for a while. Some people still viewed him as the student who had caused the drama, and others saw him as a symbol of standing up for what was right. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And Jamal was learning to accept that. Kayla had been right about one thing. he didn't have to carry the weight of everyone's expectations. It was his life to live, and while it mattered what others thought, it didn't define him. Not anymore. As Jamal sat there in his room, his thoughts drifted back to that moment with Marcus. The apology was something he hadn't expected. And though it had left him feeling a little uneasy, he had also realized something important. Marcus had changed. The apology was genuine, and it wasn't just a half-hearted attempt to smooth things over. It was real. Jamal wasn't sure if they would ever be close friends again, but there was something about the conversation that gave him hope for the future. It wasn't just Marcus. The entire situation had opened Jamal's eyes to how he had been living his life, focused so much on fighting and surviving the battles that he hadn't been living. He hadn't realized that moving forward meant giving himself space to forgive, not just others, but himself too. It was about accepting the messiness of life and letting go of the unrealistic expectations he had placed on himself. Jamal had started writing more often now, something that felt like it was part of him again. Writing had always been an outlet for him, and it was now becoming a way to process everything he'd been through. The journal entries had become longer, more honest, more reflective. He wasn't sure what would come of them, but it didn't matter. They gave him a place to lay down the weight of his thoughts. That afternoon, Jamal met Kayla and Jenna at their usual spot in the cafeteria. There was a new air between them, less tension, more understanding. They were no longer just his friends, they were his support system. And Jamal was beginning to appreciate that more than ever. "So, are you still thinking about trying out for the basketball team next semester?" Kayla asked, a playful grin on her face. Jamal hesitated. It was a question that had been hanging in the back of his mind ever since he'd stepped onto the court for the first time in a long while. He had always loved basketball, but lately, it felt like he'd been running from everything he once enjoyed, afraid that it was all a reminder of his past mistakes. "I don't know," Jamal said, looking down at his tray. "I used to love playing, but I don't know if I'm ready to jump back into something so big. After everything that happened, I feel like I'm still trying to figure out who I am." Kayla raised an eyebrow. "Jamal, you don't have to figure it all out right now. No one expects you to have everything together. But sometimes doing something that makes you happy, like basketball, could help you find your way." Jenna nodded in agreement. "And think about it, playing again could be your chance to show the world, and yourself, that you're not defined by what happened. You're not stuck in that moment. You can move past it." Jamal glanced up at them, feeling a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. He had spent so much time focused on what had gone wrong that he'd forgotten what it felt like to think about what could go right. Basketball wasn't just about the game, it was about the freedom he felt when he played. The joy, the adrenaline, the team spirit, he missed it. "Maybe," Jamal said slowly, a spark of something new in his eyes. "Maybe I will try out. It's been a while, but I think I can handle it." Kayla smiled. "That's the spirit. Just remember, you're not doing this for anyone but yourself. You've got this." Jamal felt a shift inside him, like a piece of the puzzle had finally clicked into place. Maybe he wasn't ready to take on the world just yet, but he was starting to see that life wasn't just about surviving, it was about living. It was about finding joy again, even in the midst of everything that had happened. Later that evening, Jamal sat down at his desk, notebook open in front of him. He wasn't quite sure where to start, but something inside him told him to write. The pen moved smoothly across the page as he began to capture his thoughts. It wasn't a full entry, not yet, but he knew he had to start somewhere. "I've been trying to figure it out for a long time. How to move on, how to let go. And I've learned that you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond. You can't change the past, but you can shape your future. I think I'm ready to start shaping mine." Jamal paused, reading the sentence again. For the first time in a while, he felt like he wasn't just writing words for the sake of it. He was writing to make sense of his life, to capture this moment of clarity. It was messy, it was real, and it felt like the beginning of something new. The following days passed with a new sense of calm. Jamal was no longer obsessed with the weight of everyone's expectations. He didn't care as much about what people thought. He had learned that what mattered most was how he saw himself. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't need to be. He was a work in progress, and that was enough. The day of the basketball tryouts arrived, and Jamal walked into the gym with a quiet sense of determination. He didn't know if he would make the team, and honestly, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was doing something for himself. He was reclaiming the part of himself that he had let slip away in the aftermath of everything that had happened. Kayla and Jenna were in the stands, cheering him on as he stepped onto the court. Jamal took a deep breath, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. For the first time in months, he felt free. He wasn't Jamal the student who had caused a scene. He wasn't Jamal the kid trying to fix everything. He was just Jamal, playing the game he loved. The gym was filled with the loud echo of sneakers screeching across the polished floor, the sound of basketballs bouncing, and the shouts of players calling out to each other. Jamal's heart raced as he stood in the middle of the court, dribbling the ball and adjusting to the rhythm of the game. This was familiar territory, his comfort zone, the place where everything felt right. The air was thick with tension, but also excitement. Tryouts were in full swing, and the pressure was on. But it didn't feel like the pressure Jamal had been under before. This time, it was different. There were no expectations of him to be perfect, no worries about what others thought. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about proving to himself that he could do it, that he could find his way back to something that made him happy. For the first time in a long while, Jamal felt in control. He wasn't thinking about the past or the people who had judged him. He was simply living in the moment, focusing on the ball in his hands, the rhythm of his movements, and the goal in front of him. The world outside the gym didn't exist for him anymore. As the drill moved into a scrimmage, Jamal could feel the competitive energy rise. He'd played in pickup games before, but this felt more serious, his chance to get back into something that had always been a part of him. The coach, Coach Williams, was on the sidelines, watching carefully, evaluating every move. Jamal's mind sharpened, and he pushed himself harder. It had been a few years since he'd last been this focused, but the familiar feeling of the game, being part of a team, the teamwork, the drive to win, came flooding back. He could hear Kayla's words echoing in his mind, "You're not doing this for anyone but yourself." The words gave him the strength to push through, to give it his all. The scrimmage was intense. Jamal had always been good at reading the court, anticipating plays before they happened. His teammates passed him the ball, and he didn't hesitate. He drove past defenders, made a clean pass, and even scored a few baskets. The rush of the game felt like a lifeline, reminding him of who he was before everything became complicated. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the tryouts. Jamal's breath was heavy, his body tired, but a sense of accomplishment washed over him. He had done his best. No matter what happened next, he had reclaimed a piece of himself. The next day, the list of players who made the team was posted on the bulletin board. Jamal stood in front of it, his heart thudding in his chest. He could feel the nervous energy radiating off of the other students around him. Everyone was waiting for their names to be called, hoping for a chance to play. Jamal didn't expect to see his name at the top of the list, but he had given his best shot. That was all that mattered. He scanned the list slowly, his eyes tracing each name. Then, his breath caught. There it was, his name, right in the middle of the roster. Jamal stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. He had made the team. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about the journey he had been on, the struggles he had faced, and the growth he had experienced. Making the team felt like the beginning of something new, something he could be proud of. It wasn't about the win or the accolades, it was about proving to himself that he wasn't defined by his past, and that he could move forward. Later that afternoon, Jamal called Kayla and Jenna, excitement bubbling in his chest as he shared the news. "I made the team," he said, his voice full of disbelief, yet unmistakable pride. Kayla screamed on the other end of the phone. "I knew you could do it. You were amazing out there, Jamal. This is just the beginning." Jenna added her voice, teasing, "Looks like someone's going to be the next star of the team." Jamal laughed, shaking his head. "Nah, I don't know about that. But it feels good to be back on the court, you know." "Exactly," Kayla said, her tone softer now. "It's not about being the star. It's about doing what you love. You've come a long way, Jamal. I'm proud of you." Jamal paused for a moment, feeling his heart swell. It felt good to hear those words. It felt good to have people who believed in him, not because of what he had achieved, but because they saw who he was. His friends weren't just rooting for him to succeed in the superficial sense. They were rooting for him to be happy, to find his peace. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Jamal threw himself into practice, pushing himself to be better with each drill. He had joined the team, but now he had to prove himself every day. And that was okay. He was no longer worried about being perfect. He was determined to work hard and do his best, no matter what the outcome. As the days passed, Jamal also found himself reconnecting with old friends, ones he had drifted away from over the past few years. He began to let go of the weight he had carried for so long, realizing that his worth wasn't tied to past mistakes. His past had shaped him, but it didn't have to define him. The team bonded quickly, and Jamal found himself growing closer to his new teammates. There was camaraderie in the locker room, a sense of brotherhood that he hadn't expected. He wasn't just the guy who had caused drama anymore. He was Jamal, the player, part of the team, part of something bigger than himself. One night after practice, Coach Williams pulled him aside. "Jamal," Coach said, his voice serious, but kind, "I've been watching you. You've come a long way since the start of the season. I know things have been tough for you, but you've shown real growth. You've earned your spot on this team, and I can see the potential in you. Keep working hard, and you might find that you've got more to offer than you ever realized." Jamal looked at his coach, the words hitting him deeper than he expected. It wasn't just the praise, it was the recognition. For once, someone was seeing him for who he was now, not who he had been. And that meant everything. The season was just beginning, but Jamal felt like he was already winning. Not because of the games, or the recognition, but because he was finally learning what it meant to live for himself. He had found his way back to basketball, to his friends, and most importantly, to himself. It wasn't a perfect journey, but it was his. He wasn't the same person he had been when the drama had first erupted. He had made mistakes, learned from them, and grown stronger because of them. Now, with the team behind him and the support of his friends, Jamal was ready to face whatever came next. The game was on, and this time, he wasn't just playing for the win. He was playing for his life. It was the middle of the season, and Jamal was getting into the rhythm of his new life. Practices were intense, and the games were fast-paced, but somehow, Jamal felt like he was starting to find a balance. Basketball had become his escape, his way of proving to himself that he could move forward after everything. But just when things seemed to be settling into place, new challenges began to rise. And Jamal wasn't sure if he was ready for them. It started with the pressure. The team had been doing well, and Coach Williams had high hopes for them in the upcoming games. Jamal's performances had improved over the past few weeks, and he had earned his spot as one of the starting players. But with that came a weight he wasn't entirely prepared for, the weight of expectations. The pressure to always perform, to be the player everyone expected him to be, was suffocating. Jamal began to feel like he was living two lives, one on the court, where he was the rising star, and another off the court, where the shadow of his past still lingered. The weight of the team's success rested on his shoulders, and while he was grateful for the recognition, he couldn't help but wonder if it was too much for him to carry. He had made a name for himself as a player. But now, he needed to ask himself, who was he outside of basketball? One afternoon, after a particularly grueling practice, Jamal sat on the bleachers, catching his breath. He had played well, but the pressure was starting to get to him. His mind raced with thoughts of what was expected of him, and the anxiety began to creep back in. Kayla found him sitting there, lost in thought. She noticed the tension in his shoulders and the furrowed brow, and immediately, she sat down beside him. "Hey, you good?" she asked, her voice soft but concerned. Jamal hesitated before responding, "I don't know, Kayla. I've been trying to keep up with everything, school, basketball, my life, it feels like it's all piling on top of me. And I don't know if I can keep up anymore." Kayla looked at him with understanding. "I get it. You've been doing a lot, Jamal. But you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to carry everything on your own. You've come a long way, but that doesn't mean you have to have it all figured out. I don't know if I can keep living up to everyone's expectations," Jamal said, running a hand through his hair. "People expect me to be the best, and I don't know if I can keep doing it." Kayla leaned back against the bleacher, her gaze thoughtful. "Maybe that's the problem, Jamal. You're trying to be someone you think people want you to be. What if you just focused on being who you are, who you want to be?" Jamal looked at her, surprised by her words. "What do you mean?" Kayla smiled gently. "I mean, you've already shown people what you can do on the court. You don't need to prove anything more. You don't have to be the star every time. What if you just played for the love of the game, for yourself, not for anyone else?" Jamal was quiet for a moment. "I don't know if I can do that," he admitted. "What if I mess up? What if I let everyone down?" "You won't," Kayla replied firmly. "But even if you do, so what? You've got your friends, your teammates, they'll be there for you. You're not in this alone, Jamal. And I'm here for you, no matter what." Jamal let out a long sigh, feeling the weight on his shoulders lessen slightly. Kayla's words resonated with him. He had spent so much time focused on what others expected of him that he had lost sight of why he started playing basketball in the first place: to have fun, to challenge himself, to be part of something bigger. The idea of doing something for himself, without worrying about letting others down, was a foreign concept, but it felt like a small spark of freedom in his mind. I think you're right," Jamal said, looking up at her with a newfound sense of clarity. "I've been so caught up in what everyone expects from me. Maybe it's time to remember why I started all of this in the first place." The next game was a big one, the kind of match that people talked about for weeks. The gym was packed, the atmosphere electric. Jamal's heart raced in anticipation. He had spent the last few days reflecting on Kayla's words, trying to find peace with the idea of playing for himself. It wasn't easy, but he was determined to give it a try. The game started, and the crowd roared as the first whistle blew. Jamal's team was facing one of their toughest opponents, and the energy was high. But as Jamal dribbled down the court, something inside him shifted. He wasn't focused on the scoreboard or the expectations of his coach, his teammates, or the crowd. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just playing. He made a few incredible plays, driving to the hoop, passing the ball with precision, and making some clutch shots. But more than that, he felt like he was in control of the game, not because he was trying to meet someone else's standards, but because he was playing the way he wanted to. For the first time in a long while, Jamal smiled during a game. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about enjoying the game, the way it was meant to be. By the end of the game, his team had pulled off a narrow victory. But for Jamal, the win didn't matter as much as the feeling of freedom he had found. He had done it for himself, not for the expectations of others. And that, he realized, was enough. The locker room was filled with loud cheers and high fives as the team celebrated their win. But Jamal sat quietly in his corner, letting the moment sink in. Kayla came over to him, grinning from ear to ear. "You did it, Jamal," she said, her voice full of pride. You played for yourself, and you killed it out there. Jamal smiled back, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Yeah, I think I finally figured it out. Kayla winked at him. Told you, man. All you needed was to be yourself. As the weeks went on, Jamal continued to improve, both on the court and in his personal life. The pressure wasn't gone, but he had learned how to handle it. The expectations of others still lingered, but he no longer let them define him. He had found a way to play the game for the love of it, for the joy it brought him, not for anyone else's approval. And in doing so, he had rediscovered himself. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the school gym, casting long shadows on the polished hardwood floor. Jamal walked in early for practice, the familiar sound of bouncing basketballs and squeaking sneakers echoing around him. But today, something felt different. It wasn't just the usual pre-game jitters or the tension of trying to meet expectations, it was something deeper, something more internal. As a key player on the team now, Jamal had assumed a leadership role. He wasn't just another guy in the starting lineup, he was the guy the coach turned to when the game was on the line, the one his teammates looked to for guidance. At first, he had embraced the challenge. He liked the idea of being someone others could rely on. But as the pressure built, he started to realize just how heavy the responsibility was. It wasn't just about performing anymore, it was about making sure his team performed at their best. His teammates looked up to him, and with that came a sense of duty. Jamal knew he had to set the right example, but lately, he wasn't sure if he was up to the task. Coach Williams was waiting at the center of the court when Jamal arrived. The coach's face was serious, but there was a hint of encouragement in his eyes. "You're the heart of this team, Jamal," Coach said, his voice steady but firm. "I know you've been putting in the work, and I know you've got the skills. But as the leader, you have to make sure the team follows your lead. It's not just about what you can do on the court. It's about how you carry yourself off it, too." Jamal nodded, the weight of the words settling in. It was one thing to be a good player. It was another to be the kind of leader his team needed. And lately, Jamal had been struggling to figure out what kind of leader he was meant to be. As practice continued, Jamal tried to focus on his game, but his mind kept wandering. He kept replaying Coach's words in his head. "It's not just about what you can do on the court," he repeated silently. What did that really mean? Was it about being vocal, pushing his teammates harder, or setting an example through his actions? During a break, Jamal found himself sitting on the bench, his head resting in his hands. He had always loved basketball, but now it felt like it was more than just a game. It was a responsibility. His teammates depended on him to be the leader they needed. He couldn't afford to let them down. His best friend, Tyler, came over and sat down next to him. Tyler was one of the new players on the team, and though he was still learning the ropes, Jamal could see potential in him. Tyler had been looking up to Jamal ever since he made the starting lineup, and Jamal had noticed how the younger players seemed to follow his lead, whether it was on the court or during practices. "You good, man?" Tyler asked, sensing that something was bothering Jamal. Jamal sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Yeah, just trying to figure some things out." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "You've been killing it out there lately. Everyone's talking about how you're the leader of this team now." "Coach definitely thinks so." Jamal chuckled darkly. "That's the problem. I don't know what kind of leader I'm supposed to be. Everyone expects me to be perfect, to always have the answers. But the truth is, I don't. I'm just trying to keep up." Tyler looked at him for a moment, then grinned. "Dude, no one's expecting you to be perfect. We all know you're not a superhero. What we're looking for is someone who's real. Someone we can trust, you know. You don't have to have all the answers, Jamal. We just want you to be there when it matters." Jamal considered Tyler's words, feeling a little lighter. "I guess I've been putting a lot of pressure on myself," he admitted. "I've been trying to be this perfect leader. But maybe I need to just be myself. The way I was when I started playing." "That's the Jamal we need," Tyler said, clapping him on the back. "You've already shown us what you're capable of. Now you just need to let us do our thing and trust that we've got your back." The next game was a pivotal one. The team was facing their biggest rival of the season, and everyone was feeling the intensity. The gym was packed, the crowd's energy electrifying. Jamal could feel the pressure building, but this time, he didn't feel quite as overwhelmed. He had a new sense of clarity after his conversation with Tyler. It wasn't about being perfect or always having the right answers, it was about being authentic, about playing the game with passion, and trusting his team to do the same. As the game began, Jamal took a deep breath. He knew he had to lead, but he didn't have to do it alone. The team was strong, and they were there for each other. He focused on playing his best, but also on encouraging his teammates, lifting them up when they faltered, and celebrating their successes. In the final quarter, with the game tied and only seconds left on the clock, Jamal had the ball in his hands. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, watching the clock tick down. Jamal knew the team was depending on him, but he also knew that if he wanted to be the leader they needed, he had to trust them just as much as they trusted him. He drove toward the basket, but instead of taking the shot himself, he passed the ball to Tyler, who was wide open. Without hesitation, Tyler sank the three-pointer, winning the game as the buzzer sounded. The gym erupted in cheers. Jamal's teammates rushed over to him, lifting him up in celebration. But Jamal knew the win wasn't just about his pass. It was about the teamwork, the trust, and the belief that they could all succeed together. In the locker room after the game, Coach Williams came over to Jamal, a proud smile on his face. "That's what I'm talking about, Jamal. Leadership isn't about doing everything yourself, it's about knowing when to step up and when to trust your team. You played the perfect game tonight." Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "Thanks, Coach. I think I finally get it." As Jamal walked out of the gym later that night, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. He had led his team to victory, but more importantly, he had learned something valuable about leadership and responsibility. He didn't have to be perfect. He just had to be real, both with himself and with his teammates. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of practices, games, and constant pressure. Jamal had been playing some of his best basketball yet, but with every victory, the stakes seemed to get higher. The team had gained attention, and Jamal was becoming the focal point of the season. The school's halls were buzzing with excitement every time they walked by, and Jamal found himself both thrilled and overwhelmed by the constant scrutiny. It wasn't just the fans and the media. It was also the expectations of his friends, his teammates, and even his family. His mother, while proud of his accomplishments, had begun to push him even harder. "You're on the verge of something big, Jamal," she would tell him. "You need to stay focused. Keep pushing, keep working. Don't let up." At first, Jamal took it all in stride. He'd always been the type to push himself, and he had made it this far because of his determination. But lately, it was starting to feel like it was no longer just about basketball. It felt like everyone around him was staking their hopes on his success, and that was beginning to weigh heavily on him. It all came to a head one Friday afternoon, just days before a major tournament. Jamal had been struggling with the pressure for a while, but that day, it was particularly bad. He had missed an important class earlier in the day to attend a special practice session for the upcoming tournament, and now he was running late for a group project meeting with some classmates. The tension in his chest grew with every passing minute. When Jamal walked into the library where he was supposed to meet his group, he saw his friends already gathered around a table, their eyes on him. There was an immediate shift in the energy of the room, and Jamal could feel the judgment in the air. "Nice of you to show up," one of his teammates, Marcus, said with a hint of sarcasm. "The rest of us have been here for an hour waiting. Some of us actually care about schoolwork, Jamal." Jamal felt a pang of frustration. "I'm sorry, okay? I had practice. You know how it is." I'm doing the best I can. Yeah, well, the best you can is apparently showing up late and letting the rest of us pick up the slack, Marcus replied, crossing his arms. Jamal opened his mouth to retort, but he could feel his patience thinning. The constant pressure from all sides was catching up with him, and Marcus's comment felt like one more thing pushing him to his limit. Look, I didn't come here to argue, Jamal said through gritted teeth. Let's just finish this, all right? But the damage had already been done. The rest of the group exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. Jamal sat down, but the unease in the room was palpable. His mind raced with thoughts of the tournament, his team, the expectations he was struggling to meet, and now his classmates who were starting to resent him for not being there for the group project. He had tried to balance everything, basketball, school, his personal life, but it was becoming impossible. Later that evening, Jamal found himself alone on the basketball court, practicing shots in the dim light. The sounds of the ball bouncing and the swoosh of the net were the only things that seemed to bring him any peace. But even here, where he had once found joy, he felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. He was supposed to be the leader, the one everyone looked up to. But lately, all he felt was exhaustion and frustration. As he lined up another shot, he heard footsteps approaching. He turned to see Kayla walking onto the court, her shoes squeaking softly on the hardwood floor. Jamal, she called gently. You're out here again. He sighed, not bothering to stop his practice. I'm just trying to clear my head. Kayla walked over to him, her expression a mix of concern and understanding. I get it, she said. But you can't keep doing this. You've been running yourself into the ground lately. Jamal didn't answer right away. Instead, he sank into a chair nearby, resting his elbows on his knees. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Kayla. Everyone wants something from me. The team. Coach. My family. Even my friends. It feels like I can't keep up, and the moment I slip, everything falls apart. Kayla sat down beside him. I get that. The pressure is intense. But you're only one person, Jamal. You can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You're doing your best, and that's enough. He glanced at her, frustration evident in his eyes. Is it enough? Because it doesn't feel like it. I've been trying to balance school, basketball, my friends, and it feels like I'm failing at all of it. Everyone expects me to be perfect. To be the leader. And I'm just tired. Kayla reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to be perfect. No one expects you to be. People love you for who you are, Jamal, not for how much you can accomplish. You're a great player, but you're also a human being. And humans aren't perfect. Jamal took a deep breath, feeling the weight in his chest loosen just a little. Kayla was right. He had been trying to be everything to everyone, and in the process, he had lost sight of what mattered most, his own well-being. The next day, Jamal took a step back. He decided to apologize to his classmates for his lateness and the tension it had caused during the group project. It wasn't easy, but he knew it was necessary. He also reached out to Coach Williams, admitting that the pressure was getting to him, and asked for some guidance on how to better handle it. Coach didn't lecture him. Instead, he listened. You're doing something most people can't even imagine, Jamal. You're balancing a lot. But you have to remember that you're part of a team, on and off the court. It's okay to lean on others, to ask for help. By the time the tournament arrived, Jamal was in a better place mentally. He had learned that it was okay to not have everything figured out. He didn't have to carry the burden of perfection, and he didn't have to do it alone. With his teammates, his friends, and Kayla by his side, Jamal felt ready to face whatever came next. As he stepped onto the court, the familiar buzz of excitement in the air, Jamal realized something important. This wasn't just about the game. It was about growth, both as a player and as a person. And no matter what the outcome, he knew that he was exactly where he needed to be. The gym was packed again, just like it had been the night before. The crowd's energy buzzed through the air, a constant hum of excitement and anticipation. Jamal felt it, too, the weight of the moment. The championship game. It was the culmination of everything he had worked for all season. Every practice, every early morning, every late-night shot. This was it. He was standing at the edge of something that could define his future. The stakes were high. Not just for him, but for the entire team. They had fought long and hard to get here, and Jamal had no intention of letting them down. He had come to terms with his leadership role, and now he was ready to give it everything he had. But as the buzzer went off for the pre-game warm-ups, a new wave of doubt crept into Jamal's mind. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of success, but also personal challenges. And the weight of those challenges was heavier now, more real than ever. He had made peace with his teammates, with coach, and with his own self-doubts. But tonight, he had to face the biggest test of all, his own ambition. He knew the importance of this game. It wasn't just about winning, it was about proving to himself that he could handle the pressure, that he could balance being the star athlete with everything else he had been learning about leadership. But a voice in the back of his head kept whispering, "What if it's not enough?" Jamal stood by the court, bouncing the basketball between his hands, trying to focus, to silence that voice. But it was hard. So many expectations. His mom was in the stands, his teammates were counting on him, and the whole school was watching. It was as if every step he took was being scrutinized, every decision weighed in the balance. He had been preparing for this moment for what seemed like years, but now that it was here, he realized something: he didn't know if he was ready. Kayla, who had been by his side for months, came up beside him just as he was about to turn and head to the locker room. She saw the look in his eyes and could tell that he was spiraling again, drowning in his thoughts. "You good?" she asked softly, not wanting to disturb his concentration, but knowing he needed someone to talk to. Jamal forced a small smile. "Yeah, just, a lot going through my mind." Kayla studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing with concern. "I know you. This isn't just about the game, is it?" Jamal hesitated for a moment, then let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know if I can do this, Kayla. I've worked so hard for this. But what if I mess up? What if all of this life, comes crashing down?" Kayla didn't hesitate. She put a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "You've already done the hard part, Jamal. You've been through everything that's been thrown your way. You're not alone. You don't have to do this by yourself." He looked at her, her steady gaze reassuring him. "I feel like I'm letting everyone down if I don't get it perfect. Everyone's counting on me. I can't just be the guy who plays well, you know. I have to be the one who carries everyone. The one who leads them to victory. The one who shows everyone what it looks like to be perfect." Kayla shook her head, her expression unwavering. "No one is perfect, Jamal. Not you. Not anyone. You can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You can be a great leader without being perfect. Just look at how far you've come. You've done it without pretending to be something you're not." Jamal's chest tightened, but hearing her words felt like a weight had been lifted, even if just for a moment. "But what if I fail?" "You don't fail until you stop trying," Kayla said with a smile. "And I know you. You're not someone who's going to stop." The game began, and everything Jamal had been thinking about melted away. The roar of the crowd, the squeak of sneakers against the hardwood, and the familiar rhythm of the game all seemed to blur into one. For the first time in weeks, he felt the pure joy of playing the sport he loved. The weight lifted, even if just temporarily. He was focused on the game, not the pressure. Not the expectations. Jamal was playing better than ever, his moves fluid and calculated, his passes crisp. His teammates rallied around him, feeding off the energy he gave off. It felt like everything was in sync, as if they were all moving as one cohesive unit. But with 2 minutes left in the final quarter, things took a turn. The game was tied, the clock ticking down, and Jamal had the ball in his hands. He could hear the loud chants of the crowd, his heart racing in his chest. This was the moment. The game was on his shoulders. He drove toward the basket, his mind racing. His teammates were open, but this was his moment. He could feel it. This was his chance to prove to everyone, and to himself, that he was capable of handling the pressure. That he could lead them to victory. As Jamal jumped for the layup, his body was in perfect form, but something happened. One of the opposing players, who had been guarding him, made an unexpected move, and before Jamal could release the ball, his opponent swatted it away. The ball flew out of bounds. For a split second, everything stopped. The gym fell silent. Jamal's heart pounded in his ears. He couldn't believe it. He had missed his chance. Coach Williams called a timeout, and Jamal sat on the bench, staring at his hands. The pressure of the moment had gotten to him. He had let it slip through his fingers. Kayla walked over to him, kneeling beside him. "Hey, you're good. You're still in control." Jamal shook his head, fighting back the frustration. "I messed up. I had the chance to win it, and I blew it. I can't believe I did that." Kayla put a hand on his shoulder again, her voice calm but firm. "You're more than just one play. You've been playing your heart out all game. It's not over yet, Jamal. You're still here. You still have the chance to make it right." With less than a minute left, Jamal found himself in a similar situation. The game was still tied, and the ball was in his hands again. This time, he took a deep breath and remembered Kayla's words. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about taking responsibility and doing the best he could with what he had. The weight of the moment still sat heavy on him, but he no longer saw it as a burden. This time, he felt at peace. He passed the ball to Tyler, who was wide open by the three-point line. Tyler took the shot. The ball sailed through the air, and time seemed to slow. The buzzer rang. Swish. The gym erupted in cheers. Jamal's teammates flooded the court, lifting Tyler into the air as they celebrated their hard-earned victory. Jamal stood at the sidelines, a sense of relief washing over him. He had been there for his team when it counted. Not as a perfect player, but as a leader who trusted his teammates, who didn't shy away from his responsibility. Later, in the locker room, Coach Williams approached him with a proud smile. "You led them to victory tonight, Jamal. Not just because you were the star, but because you knew when to trust the team. That's what leadership is all about." Jamal smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "Thanks, Coach. I think I finally understand what you meant." The celebrations had been long and loud. The gym echoed with chants and cheers long after the game ended, and Jamal's team basked in the glory of their hard-won victory. He had done it. They had done it. Their championship victory felt like the culmination of a season full of sweat, sacrifice, and countless hours on the court. But as the final moments of the night wound down, a strange sense of emptiness began to settle in Jamal's chest. It wasn't because he hadn't been happy about the win, on the contrary, he had never felt more elated. It was because, deep down, he knew that the joy from this victory would soon fade. The reality of what came next was looming over him, and it felt heavier than the trophy that sat on the team's bench. Jamal didn't know what the future held. He had reached the pinnacle of high school basketball, and while there was a college scholarship on the table and scouts were starting to show interest, a part of him was unsure about what that next step should be. The excitement of victory was now mixed with a rising tide of uncertainty. The night after the game, Jamal lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from Kayla. "Kayla, hey, how are you feeling? Still soaking it in?" Jamal stared at the screen for a moment, then replied, "It's all a blur, honestly. It's like everything happened so fast." "Kayla, I get that. You've been working so hard for this. But I'm proud of you, Jamal. You've come a long way. Jamal smiled slightly, but the heaviness in his chest remained. Thanks. But now what? I feel like there's a lot more riding on all of this than just the win. There was a long pause before Kayla responded. I get it. It's a big deal. But remember what you've been learning through all this. You don't have to have it all figured out. You've been working hard for this moment, but don't let it define you. There's so much more to who you are than just basketball. Jamal stared at her words, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had spent so much of his life focused on basketball, on proving that he was worth something, that he had neglected the other parts of himself. He had neglected the things that truly mattered, the relationships, his future beyond the court, and most of all, his own peace of mind. The following morning, Jamal headed to school, where the hallway was filled with excited chatter about the game. The victory had been the talk of the town, and everyone seemed eager to congratulate him. Teachers, classmates, even strangers gave him high fives and pats on the back. But as Jamal made his way to his locker, he couldn't shake the feeling of being caught in a whirlwind. People saw the success. They saw the trophy, the applause, the glory. But Jamal felt like something inside him was quietly unraveling. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from his mother. Mom, you did it, Jamal. We're so proud of you. This is just the beginning, baby. What's next for you? Have you decided yet? Jamal swallowed hard. The pressure was mounting again. Everyone expected him to have a plan. Everyone expected him to know what came next, to continue the trajectory of his success into something even bigger. But Jamal didn't know if he was ready for that. He had worked his whole life for basketball, but now that he was standing on the precipice of his future, he wasn't sure what it was going to look like. He walked into his first class of the day, his mind still heavy with the weight of the decision he had yet to make. He found an empty seat in the back of the room, but before he could sit down, he saw Mr. Harris, the guidance counselor, walking toward him. Jamal. Mr. Harris greeted him with a smile. We need to talk about your college applications. You've got some offers on the table, but we need to start making decisions soon. Jamal's stomach tightened. He had been avoiding this conversation for weeks, hoping that it would magically resolve itself. But now that it was here, it felt like a giant storm cloud looming overhead. Yeah, sure, Jamal said quietly, sitting down. I've been meaning to get to that. Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow. Well, you're running out of time, my friend. There's a lot of interest in you, but you've got to decide where you want to go. Your talent won't wait forever, and neither will the scholarships. Jamal nodded, trying to mask his growing anxiety. He had always dreamed of playing professionally, of going to a top-tier school and proving himself on the biggest stage. But now, with his family's expectations weighing on him and the pressure of making the right choice, he wasn't sure what the future held. The bell rang, signaling the end of the class, and Jamal walked out into the hall, lost in thought. He didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to take the opportunity to go pro, to take that scholarship and never look back. But another part of him, one he hadn't given enough thought to, wondered if there was more to life than just basketball. What if he wasn't defined by this game? What if his purpose wasn't just about sports? He had so many questions, and no clear answers. That afternoon, Jamal walked to the park, hoping to clear his mind. The weather was warm, the sun starting to dip behind the trees, casting a golden light over everything. He sat on a bench by the courts, watching the kids play basketball. They were laughing, shouting, having fun without a care in the world. It was a reminder of when basketball had been nothing more than a way to pass the time, when it had been just a game. He missed that feeling. The purity of it. Kayla found him there, sitting alone, lost in thought. Hey, she said, sitting down beside him. What's going on? You've been quiet all day. Jamal exhaled slowly, rubbing his face. I don't know, Kayla. Everyone expects me to have it all figured out now. The college offers, the professional scouts, everyone thinks I should just pick a path and go for it. But I don't know what I want. I don't know if I want any of this. Kayla looked at him with understanding. You don't have to have it all figured out, Jamal. Just because the world is pushing you to make decisions doesn't mean you have to rush. You've worked so hard for this, and you've earned the right to choose what's best for you. Jamal nodded slowly, the weight on his shoulders lessening just a little. I think I've been trying to prove something to everyone, my family, the coaches, even myself. But I've got to figure out what I really want, you know. Not just what everyone else wants. Kayla smiled. That's the most important thing. You've already come so far. Now it's time to figure out what's next for you, not anyone else. The night had come to an end, and the park was nearly empty. The lights flickered above the courts, casting a dim, amber glow over the basketball rims. Jamal sat on the bench next to Kayla, the cool evening air brushing against his face. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of calm. The kind of peace you get when you stop running from your thoughts and just sit with them. But even as he sat there, the uncertainty of his future lingered like a shadow over him. He knew he had to make decisions soon, and he was no longer sure where to begin. Thanks for being here, Kayla, Jamal said softly, breaking the silence. I don't know what I would have done without you. Kayla smiled, nudging him gently. You don't have to thank me. I'm your friend. I'm always going to be here, no matter what you decide. Jamal looked out at the empty courts. The sound of a distant train passing by, the rustling of the leaves in the trees, the occasional dribble of a ball from the nearby neighborhood kids, it all felt like the world was moving on, whether he was ready for it or not. I just keep thinking about all the people who are counting on me, he continued, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Mom. The coaches. The scouts. Everyone's looking at me like I have this whole future laid out already. But I don't even know if basketball is what I want anymore. I don't know if it's what I'm supposed to want. Kayla turned to him, her expression serious but warm. I think that's okay. You've been so focused on this one path for so long, it's hard to see beyond it. But you've done a lot of work. You've worked hard for what you've achieved, and no one can take that from you. But if you want to go in a different direction, that's okay too. It's your life, Jamal. You're allowed to change your mind. Jamal sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't even know where to start. I feel like I'm letting everyone down by not taking the scholarship or trying to go pro. But at the same time, I can't pretend like I'm not confused. I need to figure out what I want, not what everyone else expects from me. Kayla nodded thoughtfully. You've been giving so much of yourself to everyone else, Jamal. It's time to take a step back and figure out what you need. Maybe basketball is part of your future, maybe it's not. But you need to listen to yourself. You've got the potential to do whatever you want. The next day, Jamal walked into school with a different mindset. The weight that had been on his shoulders for weeks was still there, but it felt lighter now. He wasn't going to have all the answers today, and that was okay. What mattered was that he was finally ready to face the reality of his situation, no longer running from it. As he entered the hallway, he was greeted with the usual congratulations. His teammates gave him high fives, and teachers clapped him on the back, praising his performance. But Jamal wasn't as absorbed in the attention as he had been before. He smiled politely, but his mind was elsewhere. It wasn't until lunchtime that he found himself in the school courtyard, standing with his mom, who had come to meet him. She had that proud, beaming smile on her face, and Jamal's heart twisted. He had always wanted to make her proud, but now, he wasn't so sure what path would do that. You've been amazing, Jamal, his mom said, her voice filled with love and admiration. I can't even tell you how proud I am of you. All of your hard work is paying off. Jamal hesitated, then took a deep breath. Thanks, Mom. But I think we need to talk. His mom raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in his tone. What about, baby? I've been thinking a lot, Jamal began, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. I know you want me to take the scholarship, to keep pushing for a career in basketball. But I'm not sure that's what I want anymore. I don't know if basketball is the direction I want to go in. His mom's face softened, and for a brief moment, she just looked at him. It was clear that she had expected this conversation sooner or later, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. Jamal, I've always wanted the best for you. I've watched you work so hard for this dream, and I've seen how much this game means to you. But I've also seen you struggle. I just want you to be happy. Jamal swallowed. I don't know what happiness looks like right now, Mom. I've spent so long thinking that basketball was my only way out, that it was the only way to make something of myself. But I've been so focused on that one goal that I haven't stopped to think about what I really want. Maybe I need to figure out who I am without basketball first. And I think I need your support to do that. There was a long pause as his mom processed his words. She finally took his hand in hers, squeezing it gently. Jamal, I've always told you that you could do anything you put your mind to. If that means stepping away from basketball for a while to figure things out, I'll support you. It's your life. And as long as you're doing what feels right for you, I'll be proud of you no matter what. Jamal felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was disappointing her. She wasn't pushing him towards something he wasn't sure about. Instead, she was offering him the freedom to discover what he truly wanted. Later that afternoon, Jamal sat in the school counselor's office, looking at the college brochures spread out in front of him. It was the moment he had been avoiding for weeks, the decision that would shape the next chapter of his life. But as he looked at the glossy images of campuses, the sports programs, and the promises of glory, something clicked inside him. This wasn't the path he was meant to walk. Not right now, anyway. He had spent so much time focused on making a decision for everyone else, but now, he knew it was time to make a decision for himself. He picked up the brochure for the college he had been considering and slid it aside. It wasn't his choice. Not yet. Jamal walked out of the office, his mind clearer than it had been in months. He wasn't throwing away his dreams of basketball forever, but he was choosing to walk a different path for now, one where he could explore who he truly was without the pressure of others' expectations hanging over him. As he left the school building, Kayla was waiting for him, a smile already on her face when she saw the look on his. Feeling good? She asked. Jamal smiled back, a weight lifting from his chest. Yeah. I think I finally get it. I'm ready to figure out who I am, not who everyone wants me to be. Kayla's eyes softened. I'm proud of you, Jamal. Thanks, Kayla, he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. I couldn't have done this without you. Together, they walked down the sidewalk, the sun beginning to set behind them. Jamal didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face the unknown. Whatever came next, he was prepared to take it on his own terms. The days following Jamal's decision felt like the first breath of fresh air he had taken in months. As he walked through the halls of his high school, the weight of the future no longer felt so suffocating. For once, he wasn't walking with the pressure of expectation on his shoulders. He was free to decide his own direction, and that realization filled him with a newfound sense of clarity. Jamal had spent most of his life building his identity around basketball. It had been his escape, his dream, his purpose. But in the past few weeks, he had come to understand something far more important: basketball didn't define who he was. He was more than a game, more than a title, more than the approval of others. He was Jamal, and he had the power to choose his own path. The decision wasn't easy, but it was the right one. And with that certainty, Jamal felt more grounded than ever before. The morning after his talk with his mom, Jamal woke up early to meet Kayla at their favorite coffee shop. As he entered, the familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and the quiet hum of the shop was a comforting backdrop to his thoughts. Kayla was already sitting at a corner table, her laptop open, though she was more focused on her phone than her work. When Jamal walked in, she immediately stood up, giving him a bright, encouraging smile. "You look like you've been carrying a heavy load," she said with a playful grin. "Did you finally figure it out?" Jamal sat down across from her, nodding. He took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxed for the first time in what felt like ages. "Yeah, I did," he said, his voice steady. "I decided I'm going to take some time off from basketball. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do yet, but I'm not going to rush into anything. I need to figure out what I really want for myself." Kayla's eyes lit up with pride. "That's amazing, Jamal. I'm so happy for you. You've always been so focused on what everyone else expects of you, it's about time you focused on what you need." Jamal smiled, feeling the weight on his chest lift even more. "Thanks, Kayla. I couldn't have done it without your support." As they sat there, talking and laughing, Jamal realized that this was the first time in months that he had felt truly at ease. For once, his life wasn't about making the next big move in basketball. It was about embracing the present moment, accepting where he was, and being open to whatever the future might bring. Weeks passed, and Jamal threw himself into exploring new interests. He enrolled in a few classes at a local community college, focusing on subjects he had always been curious about but never had the chance to explore. He took up painting, something he had always wanted to try but had put off in favor of his sports career. He joined a book club and found himself immersed in conversations about everything from literature to philosophy. The more he experienced, the more he realized how much he had been missing out on. In those quiet moments of reflection, Jamal understood that his identity wasn't tied to any single pursuit. He was constantly evolving, and with each new experience, he was uncovering layers of himself he had never known existed. But it wasn't just his academic and creative pursuits that changed. His relationships with the people around him deepened as well. He spent more time with his family, listening to their stories, hearing their hopes for him, and realizing that their love for him wasn't conditional on his success in basketball. His bond with Kayla grew stronger too, as they shared not just the fun moments, but the vulnerable ones, too. One evening, as Jamal and Kayla sat on the roof of his apartment building, watching the city lights below, Jamal turned to her and said, "I'm starting to think that this journey wasn't just about figuring out what I want to do with my life. It's about learning who I am, without all the noise from the outside world telling me who I'm supposed to be." Kayla looked at him thoughtfully. "I think you're right. Sometimes we get so caught up in what everyone else expects that we forget to ask ourselves what we want. But you're doing it, Jamal. You're learning to listen to yourself. And that's huge." Jamal nodded, a sense of gratitude filling his heart. "I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time, I'm excited to see where it takes me. I don't have all the answers, but I'm not afraid of the unknown anymore." As the months went by, Jamal made the decision to move forward with his education. He chose a major that sparked his curiosity, something he had never considered when he was focused on basketball. He continued to play casually, but without the pressure, without the need to prove anything. He found joy in the game again, but it was now just a part of his life, not the defining factor. One day, Jamal received a letter from a prestigious university offering him a full scholarship. They wanted him to play basketball for their team. But as he read the letter, he felt no rush to make a decision. For once, he realized that he wasn't obligated to accept. The opportunity was there if he wanted it, but he no longer felt trapped by it. He called his mom, the woman who had been his greatest supporter. "I got the scholarship, Mom," he said, his voice calm but steady. Her response was filled with pride and love. "That's amazing, Jamal. But you've always known what's best for you. Whatever you choose, I know you'll make the right decision." Jamal smiled, feeling at peace. "Thanks, Mom. I've decided to take a step back for now. I want to focus on my education and figure out what else I'm passionate about. But I'll always love the game. It's just, I'm not in a rush anymore." As the sun set on another day, Jamal stood at the edge of the park, watching the basketball court he had spent so many years on. It still held memories, good and bad, but now, those memories were just a part of his story, not his entire story. The world was open to him now, and Jamal realized that no matter what happened, he would be okay. The journey wasn't about finding the perfect answer. It was about embracing who he was becoming along the way. As he walked away from the court, his future was still a mystery. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel afraid of it. He was ready to take on whatever came next, knowing that no matter where he went, it was his choice. And that was enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?